At this current time, April 2020, the world is dealing with a pandemic, COVID-19. The United States is struggling to have enough ventilators in space to treat everyone who has been affected. We hear about the elderly people dying because they are giving up their ventilators for the younger generations. The elderly people are giving up their ventilators are some of the most generous people because they are realizing that the amount of time they are on a ventilator can help 1 to 3 young people become well. So by them giving up the ventilator, they are helping more people. My question to you is, what makes them more virtuous? Well, my answer would be because they are benefiting the most amount of people, which is a very utilitarian way of thinking. You might be wondering, what is a utilitarian? Well, there's somebody who creates the most pleasurable outcomes, and that would be to cure the most amount of people. Are these elderly people using virtues or rules to explain how they are helping more people? We'll never know. My view on philanthropy is a virtue-based utilitarian, which falls under the category of consequentialist, meaning that I am somebody who judges an action based on its final outcomes, and I use virtues instead of rules to base my actions on. Basically, I'm a mix between John Stuart Mill and Aristotle. Aristotle believes in virtues. He states, "The good for man is an activity of the soul in accordance with virtue, or if there are more kinds of virtue than one, in accordance with the best and most powerful kind. To live in accordance with virtue, then, is to live in such a way that our activities flow naturally from virtuous disposition." What he means is that somebody who uses virtues will have a virtuous life. He does not focus how our actions will affect others like John Stuart Mill does, which is the other half of my belief. Mill is one of the most well-known rule-based utilitarians. Mill states that all action is for the sake of some end, and rules of actions, it seems natural to suppose that the rule of action must take their whole character and color from at the end of which it aims. Mill is stating that in order to figure out if something is right or wrong, we need to judge it on the outcomes. If an action produces the most amount of happiness, then we should deem it as right. But if an action produces misery, it should be deemed as wrong. He uses such rules as lying under absolutely necessary to prevent a negative outcome, whereas I believe that we should have a checklist of virtues to help us guide our decisions on whether an outcome will become positive or negative. One of the other most famous utilitarians is Bentham, who Mill bases some of his beliefs on. He believes that pleasure can be measured mathematically, and he believes that we can judge an action based on a certain end result, such as certainty, intensity, the amount of people affected, and so forth. Bentham leaves out experiences and focuses on pleasure. The nature has placed mankind under governance of two sovereign matters, pain and pleasure. It is for them alone to point out what we ought to do as well as to determine what we shall do. What he means by this is that we should do things that create the most amount of pleasure. He focuses on the easy way to create pleasure, what we should be doing, leaving out experiences. Mill focuses on how experience produce pleasure rather than the other way around. I agree with Mill on this because the experiences we have can produce pleasure. I would rather travel around the world and have pleasure because of it than sit in my house watching TV all day. Since I am a virtue-based utilitarianist, which falls under the umbrella of consequentialist, I use virtues to help rule if something is morally right or morally wrong. Just think of it as a checklist to help me guide my actions. Some of the virtues I believe that help guide a morally right person, especially when dealing with the nonprofits, are consistency, efficiency, reliability, honesty, passion, and generosity. Starting with consistency and efficiency, which go hand in hand. First, we need to know how often a nonprofit is giving money away. What are the input and output processes or steps that impact this process? In Ralph Emerson's book, Self-Reliance, he talks about consistency with the idea of change when needed, which is exactly what I believe in. A nonprofit needs to be able to be consistent with how well they are giving away money to the best and most amount of people. But at times of change, such as now dealing with COVID-19, they might want to change exactly how they help others. He states, "A foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds, adored by little statesmen and philosophers and divines. With consistency, a great soul has simply nothing to do. He may as well concern himself with shallow on a wall. Speak what you think now in hard words, and tomorrow speak to what tomorrow thinks in hard words again, though it contradicts everything you say today." Many people mix this up with what exactly he is trying to say. People believe that he thinks consistency is bad, but that's not the case. Like myself, Immersion believes that we need to acknowledge change and add it to our beliefs and way of thinking. I consider this to be like Patrick J. Hurley's idea of logical consistency. He states, "A set of statements is logically consistent if they can be true at the same time. This perfectly resembles how I think we need to stay consistent with the change." Before we can go on to talk about reliability and Tversky's view on reliability, I must clarify the difference between virtue epistemology and virtue ethics. I use virtue ethics to justify my reasoning, and that is something that you need to remember. People mix up the two, but they are very different. Virtue ethicist, it is a quest to understand and live for a moral character. They focus on the character of the person. A great example of a virtue ethicist would be Batman, because it is not a virtuous thing to want to kill your enemy. Virtue epistemology is the view of Tversky uses. First, virtue epistemology is a collection of recent approaches to epistemology that gives epistemic or intellectual virtue concepts an important fundamental role. This means that Tversky focuses on the important facts rather than the hypotheticals. She does not let the same virtues I have to guide her designs, yet she looks at the end results and she names the facts. On reliability, it is important to know how reliable a nonprofit is when working with one. A reliable source will have quality production, or in our case, constantly be giving away as much money as they can in the best way to help the most amount of people. There will be slim to no errors on their part, and they will be keeping up with good communication. Not everybody has the same view as reliability as I do, as we stated before. To begin with Tversky, she argues that the reliability of the process by which something is produced does not automatically add value to that thing, and thus that thing cannot be assumed that the reliability of the process by which a true belief is produced will add value to that true belief. So unlike me, Tversky believes that it is not how reliable something is, but the end product. If the end product results in something positive, it doesn't matter the way we got there was reliable or not. A virtue ethicist would state that if we don't know how reliable something is, then we cannot deem it to be morally right. I believe that we need to be using these virtues all the time, and if the process is faulty, then how can you say that they are morally good? A utilitarian would be morally good all the time, not morally good half the time. If a philanthropy is not reliable, then we should not be supporting them, because we don't know if they will be morally good all the time. Tversky would not agree with this. She would state that as long as she is getting the most amount of happiness, it doesn't matter if the source is reliable or not. Reliability ties into honesty, because an honest company is a reliable one. This leads me to my next point about honesty, which many philosophers refer to as truths. When working with a nonprofit, I need them to be honest with me. If something is going wrong or isn't happening, I expect there to be good communication, especially since we are the ones giving them the money. I also expect people to be honest on my end, talking about what's going on in the nonprofit. Samuel Austin Albone states in his book, Prose Questions from Socrates to Macaulay, "There is nothing so delightful as hearing or speaking of truths. For this reason, there is no conversation so agreeable as that of the man of integrity, who hears without any intention to betray and speaks without any intention to deceive. What he is saying is that when people speak truths, it is great because we are not being deceived. When working with a nonprofit, we need to speak honestly or with truths because it allows for mutual trust and a greater relationship. Passion is one of my key values because the more passionate we are about something, the harder we will work to achieve our end goal. When working with large amounts of money, we need to make sure that the people who work with it are passionate about what they're doing and to make sure that they're in the right mind state to be helping others. One philosopher who would not agree with my point of view of passion is David Hume. In the book Treatise of Human Nature, Hume talks about how we use passions to guide our decisions, and that takes away from reason. Hume states, "We speak not strictly and philosophically when we talk of the combat of our passion of reason. Reason is, and ought only to be the slave of passions, and can never pretend to any other office than to serve and obey them." As this opinion may appear somewhat extraordinary, it may not appear to confirm it by some other considerations. Hume is stating that we guide our reason only by passions, and will not look at the whole picture because we are guided by our passions. I don't believe this to be true, because when working with philanthropy, we use reasons to make us more passionate about something. The more we know about something, the more passion I have for it. And the more passionate I am about something, the harder I will work to solve the problem. We need passion in philanthropy because we need to want to help others. If you're not passionate about it, you don't have that need or that want to work harder. And that's why I think it is one of our moral rules.